It started as a fantasy both couples agreed to. There were rules, boundaries. By the time police arrived, one person was dead, but the murder didn't happen the way anyone thinks. It was a story that first gripped the internet not because of sensational headlines, but because it defied every expectation the public had about who we are and what we are capable of. Today we're going to follow a case that was labeled in newspapers and online simply as the wife swap murder, a consensual partner arrangement between two suburban couples, something whispered about behind closed doors, ended with a life taken, a family shattered, and questions left unanswered about how a carefully negotiated arrangement could lead to such a bitter outcome. The story began quietly. Like so many suburban dramas, neighbors waved at each other in manicured yards. Children played after school. Friday nights meant dinners outside or movies in. On the surface, these were ordinary lives. But beneath the surface of ordinary appearances, there were decisions, conversations, and agreements that would later come under intense scrutiny. In a town much like any other, two couples, Emmett and Candy Corrigan, and Rob and Ashley Hall, became close friends through neighborhood gatherings and mutual interests. One couple had been married for years. The other was relatively new to the community but integrated quickly into social circles. Emmett was a charismatic attorney. Candy was a devoted mother to their 5 children. They were pillars of their community. Just down the road lived Rob and Ashley Hall. Rob worked for the Ada County Sheriff's Office, a man of the law, while Ashley was known for her vibrant personality. These two couples weren't just neighbors. They were close friends. However, beneath the surface of their backyard barbecues and shared holidays, a different kind of arrangement was being discussed. Psychologists often speak of the transition from consensual non-monogamy to pathological possessiveness. What begins as a structured agreement between adults can often strip away the psychological safety net of a marriage. When the rules of a fantasy are ignored, the human brain can trigger a primitive, territorial response. In this documentary, we explore how 4 friends decided to rewrite the rules of their marriages, the specific moment when Robert Hall had a replacement, the night that left one woman dead and another facing a life behind bars. The Corrigans and the Halls spent nearly every weekend together. It started innocently, shared dinners, playdates for the kids. But by early 2011, a new lifestyle was introduced. The couples entered into a wife-swapping arrangement. Over time, conversations that once revolved around soccer games, block parties, and weekend plans started to explore more personal subjects. Topics that were once joked about in hushed tones over wine began to be discussed with a surprising level of candidness. What was initially dismissed as social curiosity gradually evolved into something both couples agreed to try: a wife swap arrangement that everyone insisted was consensual and carefully negotiated. Both parties discussed rules and boundaries in the early stages. The intention was never to harm marriages, they said. Instead, they believed they were enriching their relationships. For a time, it appeared to work that way. At first, the arrangement brought novelty and reinvigorated connections. Weekend dinners, drinks at each other's homes, joint vacations, these became the norm. Both couples shared stories of increased excitement and renewed connection with their own partners. Boundaries were talked about and revisited. There were moments of reassurance, reminders of what each person expected and what was off limits. The agreements were firm, at least that's what everyone said. For a while, it seemed as if the arrangement was strengthening, not harming their lives. But what began as a consensual decision gradually transformed into something much more complicated. One member of the arrangement, Emmett, with a respected professional life and a stable family, he began to demonstrate changes in behavior that concerned his own partner. Long after gatherings ended, Emmett continued to bring up Ashley's name. Candy noticed less interest in conversations that once mattered, and more fixation on moments when the arrangement was discussed. His focus shifted from work, family, and friendships to thoughts that centered on Ashley, the woman he had met through the arrangement. Little by little, comments that once felt like casual compliments became possessive remarks. Invitations to group dinners were subtly redirected toward smaller gatherings, and despite attempts to reassure and to set limits, the dynamic began to change. At first, others dismissed the signs as overthinking, jealousy perhaps, or just miscommunication. But friends and acquaintances began to notice shifts in behavior that could no longer be ignored. Occasions meant to build trust now highlighted discomfort, and discussions that once centered on clear agreements began to reveal underlying tensions. The woman who had become the focus of the fixation expressed discomfort. Ashley spoke of moments that felt too close, touches that lingered too long, conversations that crossed into territory she had explicitly ruled out. Her partner Robert reassured her, but privately dismissed her concerns as anxieties without basis. The result was a fracture beneath the surface, one that few outsiders could see, but that would become unmistakable. Then came the night everything changed. Emmett arrived at Ashley's home unannounced, while Rob was away on business. It was late, just after midnight, when the bell rang repeatedly at her front door. Neighbors reported hearing raised voices and what sounded like an intense argument. Inside, the confrontation escalated quickly. Security footage later showed Emmett pacing, ringing the bell again and again. Ashley tried to keep the peace, asking him to leave. He would not go. Over the course of 17 minutes, the situation deteriorated rapidly. By the time police arrived, 17 minutes after her 911 call, a life had been taken. The scene they entered was chaotic. Overturned furniture, shattered glass, signs of a struggle. And at the center of the disturbance lay the woman who had tried to end the arrangement, unresponsive from multiple stab wounds. Just beside her, the man who had come that night was found holding the weapon, calm, detached, and no attempt made to escape or resist arrest. Investigators quickly pieced together the timeline. Digital messages, call logs, and witness statements began to tell a story that differed sharply from the earlier narrative of consensual arrangements and mutual respect. What emerges from evidence, interviews, and statements is a portrait of how dramatically human relationships can shift when emotional attachment moves beyond agreed bounds. A man once seen as stable and respected acted in a moment that shattered lives. Friends, neighbors, and family struggled to reconcile who he was with what he had done. The case went to trial. Prosecutors presented evidence of fixation, boundary violations, and a series of escalating behaviors that culminated in violence. The defense attempted to frame the actions differently, but ultimately the court found the man responsible, and he was convicted of murder. Families were left to pick up the pieces. Ashley's loved ones mourned not just a death, but the abrupt end of potential futures. Emmett's family grappled with the choices that led to a life altered forever. Families were left to process grief and betrayal. The survivors were forced to reconcile with what had been allowed to unfold. The fantasy ended long before the trial, but the damage didn't. This story, marked by consent, boundaries, warnings ignored, and escalating fixation, stands as a reminder of how even carefully negotiated agreements can be misunderstood, mismanaged, and tragically misinterpreted. At its heart is someone who lost sight of the lines that separate agreement from attachment, curiosity from control, and connection from violence. And the question that remains for many who hear this story is simple. At what point did this arrangement stop being what it was supposed to be and become something no one ever intended? If you value high-researched, non-exploitative true crime that focuses on the search for justice, subscribe and click the bell to join our investigation unit. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next case.